She tried to hide the injury. The Mafia boss noticed and took an unexpected action. The hallway of the mansion shimmered under the warm glow of crystal sconces, their light reflecting across the polished marble floor like a river of gold. In that soft glow, a thin line of dark red glistened near the baseboard, almost invisible unless someone truly looked. She had prayed no one would. Mariah kept her left arm pressed tightly against her ribs, her sleeve pulled down to hide the spreading stain. Every step sent a quiet sting shooting through her side, but she forced herself upright, shoulders squared, breath held shallow. The other staff members hurried past her, eyes averted out of habit, consumed with their own duties. To them she was only another maid, another quiet woman in a black uniform, someone meant to blend into the background. And she preferred it that way. Invisibility meant safety. Invisibility meant she could keep her job, send money back home, and survive. The pain had started earlier that morning when she slipped on the back porch stairs while taking out the trash, landing hard on the wooden edge. She had bitten her lip to keep from crying out. She knew the rules. No injuries that slowed the workflow. No weakness. No exceptions. She had wrapped the bruise as tightly as she could with a strip of cotton cloth and kept moving. But the bruise had deepened into a sharp, hot ache, and now a thin edge of blood had seeped through the fabric. She adjusted her sleeve again, pretending to fix her uniform, hoping the motion looked natural. What she did not know was that someone had been watching her from the far end of the hall. Dominic Romano stepped out of the shadowed doorway of his office, his presence shifting the air the way a sudden drop in temperature announces an approaching storm. He was tall and sharply built, with the severe calm of a man who carried power the way others carried breath. People rarely looked him in the eye. People rarely dared. Mariah did not see him at first. She kept walking, her pace steady, her eyes lowered, until she felt a strange stillness ripple through the hall. The kind of silence that makes the heart still for a moment. She lifted her gaze. Dominic stood only a few steps away. His expression unreadable. His eyes, dark and intense, drifted downward and paused. Not on her face, not on her uniform, but on the faint ribbon of red she was trying so desperately to hide along the inside of her arm. He said nothing. He did not have to. The room seemed to stop breathing as his gaze sharpened, as if he were seeing past the fabric, past the posture, past every careful lie she had constructed to appear fine. And in that silent moment, Mariah understood two things with absolute certainty. He had noticed, and whatever he chose to do next would change everything. Mariah froze under Dominic's unblinking stare, the air between them tightening the way a room does before a storm breaks. Her instinct was immediate and desperate. Lower your gaze. Keep walking. Pretend nothing is wrong. Pretend you are invisible. She dipped her head respectfully and attempted to step aside, but the motion sent a sharp pulse of pain shooting across her ribs. Her breath caught. The tiny flinch was slight, barely noticeable to anyone else. But not to him. Dominic observed people the way a hawk observes the movement of grass, noticing what others missed. That was why he survived in a world sharpened by danger. That was why even his closest men feared lying to him. Mariah kept her voice steady, gentle, almost apologetic. Sir, I was just heading to the laundry hall. I can move out of your way. She hoped he would keep walking. She hoped he would dismiss her with a curt nod. But Dominic Romano did not move. He studied her in a silence heavy enough to make her pulse tremble in her throat. His eyes lowered again, not in disrespect, but in calculation. They paused on the subtle darkening of her sleeve, the faint tremor in her fingers as she tried adjusting her uniform again, and the strange way she favored her left side, shifting her weight like someone fighting gravity itself. Mariah felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hated moments like this. Moments when someone might notice. Moments when her body betrayed her attempts to keep her dignity intact. She straightened her posture, ignoring the pain stretching across her ribs. She made herself meet his gaze, even though every muscle begged her to look away. I am fine, sir, she said carefully. Everything is all right. Dominic said nothing. He did not step closer or farther. He simply watched her, and the way he watched her made her feel as though the fabric covering her arm had turned transparent. The hallway felt colder now, as if the marble beneath her feet were pulling the warmth from her bones. Behind them, footsteps echoed faintly from the other end of the corridor as two housekeepers hurried past, whispering about a dinner event scheduled for the evening. Their voices fell silent the moment they saw Dominic. They pressed themselves against the wall and moved quickly, eager to escape the invisible weight he carried with him. Mariah clasped her hands behind her back to hide how they shook. She forced her breathing to remain even. She reminded herself of everything that depended on staying calm. Her rent, her mother's medical bills, her little brother's school supplies, her dignity. Lying was safer than the truth. She repeated the same quiet mantra in her mind. Do not draw attention. Do not cause trouble. Do not make him ask questions. Dominic finally spoke, his voice low and even, almost deceptively calm. When did this happen? The words were not loud, but they were heavy enough to make her heart jolt. Mariah blinked, feigning confusion. When did what happen, sir? His gaze dropped once more to the slight curve of her arm, then lifted to meet her eyes with a patience that felt more dangerous than anger. The injury you were trying to hide. Tone unchanged, not accusing, simply stating what he already knew. For a moment, Mariah forgot how to breathe. She opened her mouth, then closed it, surprised by how quickly lies evaporated under his scrutiny. She tried again. It is nothing, sir. Just a small bruise. I bumped into a shelf earlier. Dominic tilted his head, his eyes narrowing by the smallest degree, an almost imperceptible shift that still managed to send a ripple of tension down the hallway. That is not from a shelf. His voice was quiet and certain, as though he were reciting something already proven. His attention remained locked on her, waiting not for her excuse, but for the truth beneath it. Mariah steadied herself. She did not know why he cared. She did not want him to care. Caring from a man like him could be a dangerous thing, a thing that changed the ground beneath a person's feet. I can still work, sir, she whispered. Please do not worry about me. She attempted to step backward to end the conversation, but the slight shift in her movement caused her injured side to brush against the seam of her apron. The pain was sharp, sudden, and it made her inhale sharply through her teeth before she could stop herself. That was the moment the last barrier fell. Dominic's expression changed. It was subtle, almost too subtle for anyone else to notice. The faint tightening of the jaw, the slight lift of the chin, the quiet flare of disapproval in his eyes. Not anger at her. Anger at the pain. Anger that she had been carrying it alone. He stepped forward with a controlled calm that made Mariah forget to move. Forget to breathe. Forget to hide. He stopped just close enough that she could see the reflection of the hallway lights in his gaze. You are hurt, he said quietly, and you will tell me how. There was no threat in his voice. No cruelty. Only something unexpected. Something she had never imagined she would hear from a man like him. Concern. The hallway seemed to narrow around Mariah as Dominic's quiet words settled in the air, leaving no space for escape. Concern. She had heard that tone directed at others, never at herself, and certainly never from a man whose presence alone kept an entire mansion on alert. Mariah lowered her head instinctively, her fingers tightening against the fabric of her apron to stop their trembling. The bruise throbbed beneath her sleeve with a slow, deep ache that made her vision pulse for a moment. She prayed he would let the matter drop, but the silence that followed made her realize he was not going to walk away. Dominic shifted his weight slightly, just enough for her to sense the authority radiating from him, an authority that made even the boldest men step back. He was blocking the hallway now, though he had not touched her, and the space around them felt impossibly still. Behind him, the long corridor stretched with gleaming marble floors, tall framed artwork, and double doors leading to rooms she was never meant to enter. This mansion was a world of power and wealth, a place where she was supposed to remain unseen. She swallowed hard, attempting to gather composure. Sir, she said softly, I promise it is nothing serious. I can continue working. I do not want to interrupt anything. Dominic did not respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head the smallest amount, his eyes tracing the subtle tension in her shoulders and the tightness of her movements. His voice, when it came, was calm but unyielding. Pain changes the way a person breathes. Your breathing has been different since you stepped into this hallway. Mariah felt her heart tighten. It was not just that he noticed. It was that he understood. She shook her head gently. I do not want to cause trouble, sir. I really am all right. He took one measured step closer, closing the distance just enough for her to feel the shift in the air. You are not all right, and you should never feel afraid to say so in my house. Those words pierced her more sharply than the injury itself. She opened her mouth, but no explanation formed. Instead, a warmth gathered behind her eyes, and she blinked quickly to force the emotion down. She could not cry. Not here. Not in front of him. As the silence stretched, the heavy oak door behind Dominic creaked open, and a member of his security team stepped out. The guard froze when he saw them. He bowed his head respectfully. "Sir, the guests for the evening event will be arriving within the next hour. We need your confirmation for the security plan." Dominic did not turn around. "Schedule it without me for now." The guard hesitated. "Sir, they are asking for you specifically." Dominic lifted a hand, a simple gesture that ended the conversation. "I said without me." The guard nodded quickly and retreated inside, closing the door softly. Mariah felt her breath hitch. He had postponed a formal event. For her, she wanted to disappear into the polished floor. This should not be happening. She was a maid, a background figure, someone expected to endure quietly and keep pace with expectations no matter the personal cost. Dominic looked at her once more, his expression unreadable but intense. "Tell me what happened, Mariah." Her name in his voice made her chest tighten. She had not expected him to remember it. She had not expected him to say it gently. She hesitated, her fingers curling and uncurling as she tried to form the words. "I slipped this morning," she whispered. "On the back stairs. It was my fault. I should have been more careful. I landed badly, and I think I bruised my side, but I did not want anyone to worry. I needed to finish my tasks." Dominic listened without interrupting. The soft overhead lights cast a halo across the sharp angles of his face, making him look carved out of shadow and resolve. When she finished, he exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that suggested anger, not at her, but at the idea of her struggling alone. "Why did you not tell anyone?" he asked quietly. "That is what the staff medical room is for." Her voice trembled. "Because I did not want to be replaced. I cannot afford to lose this job." The confession hung between them like a fragile thread. Dominic closed his eyes for a brief moment, a moment that revealed more emotion than she expected. When he opened them again, the decision in his gaze was unmistakable. "You will never lose your job for being injured. Do you understand?" She nodded, though uncertainty still flickered across her features. Dominic stepped slightly to the side and gestured down the hall with an authoritative motion. "Come with me." She hesitated. "Sir, I can manage on my own." He shook his head with finality. "You are coming with me to the medical room. You are not going to walk another step in pain." For the first time since she entered the mansion weeks ago, Mariah felt something she had not expected to feel in this place of power. She felt seen. Mariah hesitated as Dominic motioned for her to walk beside him, her breath catching as she realized the direction he intended to take her. The medical room was located near the private wing of the mansion, a place where only authorized staff were ever allowed. She had never been permitted near that hallway before. The rules were clear, and every worker in the mansion lived by them. Stay out of the private wing. Keep your head down. Ask no questions. Move quickly and quietly. Yet now, with every careful step she took behind Dominic, those rules seemed to bend in ways she did not understand. She kept her injured arm pressed tightly against her side, hoping the steady pressure would dull the pain. The marble floor beneath her shoes gleamed like a mirror, reflecting her small, careful movements as she followed the man who ruled this place with a quiet authority that no one dared challenge. The corridor stretched long and silent, lined with tall windows that overlooked the sprawling front gardens. Beyond the glass, the afternoon sun hung low, painting the hedges and stone pathways in warm gold. Normally, Mariah found comfort in avoiding these areas. They reminded her of how different this world was from her own. But today she felt something unfamiliar. Exposed. The silence between them grew heavier with each step. She tried to keep her breathing steady, tried not to wince, tried not to appear weak. But each movement sent a small shock of pain across her ribs, pulling her posture forward no matter how hard she tried to hold herself upright. Dominic noticed. He did not look directly at her, but his pace slowed by a fraction, just enough for her to keep up without straining. No one had ever adjusted their pace for her before. When they reached the corner of the private wing, 2 guards stood watch near the tall double doors. The moment they saw Dominic approaching, their backs stiffened, and they lowered their heads respectfully. "Sir." They stepped aside quickly to clear the path. Their eyes flickered toward Mariah for only a second, confusion flashing across their faces. No maid walked this hall. Ever. Dominic did not acknowledge their confusion, nor did he explain. He simply opened the door with a light push and gestured for Mariah to step inside. The medical room was quieter than she expected. Clean, bright, and faintly scented with antiseptic. A stainless steel counter lined one wall, stocked neatly with bandages, ointments, and medical tools. A padded examination table sat in the center of the room under warm overhead lights. Mariah froze just past the doorway. She had never been in a place like this. Her pulse raced with a mix of fear and embarrassment. "Sir, I can handle this myself," she whispered. "I can wrap it again. I do not want to be a burden." Dominic turned to face her fully for the first time since they left the hallway. His expression was controlled, but there was something deeper beneath the surface, something she could not quite name. "You are not a burden, Mariah. You are injured. That is all that matters." Her throat tightened. She looked down quickly to hide. The way her eyes stung. The medical room felt colder now. Or maybe it was her nerves that made the air sharper. She took a small step backward. "Sir, truly, you have important things to do. I can take care of this." Dominic took one step closer. "You try to handle it yourself, and you are standing here in pain because of it. That is not acceptable." She swallowed hard. "But I do not want anyone to lose patience with me. I know how busy the staff is. I know how many things need to be prepared for the event tonight." His jaw tensed at her words. "Who told you were not allowed to ask for help?" She blinked, startled by the question. "No one told me that, sir. It is just understood. There is always too much to do, and I cannot risk becoming someone who slows others down." She expected him to dismiss her explanation, or grow impatient, or tell her she was being dramatic. Instead, his voice softened in a way that made her feel suddenly unsteady. "Pain does not make you weak, and needing help does not make you replaceable." Her breath trembled. She tried to steady it, but it escaped unevenly, making her shoulders shake. The vulnerability she had fought so hard to hide seeped through the cracks in her composure. Dominic gestured again toward the examination table, his tone firm but not harsh. "Sit." She hesitated one last time, her eyes searching his face for any sign of mockery or judgment. She found none. Slowly, with the careful movements of someone carrying an invisible weight, Mariah crossed the quiet room and lowered herself onto the padded table. For the first time since she arrived in this mansion of power and distance, she felt something shift inside her. She was no longer invisible, and that terrified her more than any pain ever could. Mariah sat on the padded examination table with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her shoulders drawn inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller in the bright, quiet room. The overhead lights cast a warm glow across the metal cabinets and shelves, but the comfort of that light could not settle the storm of worry in her chest. She heard Dominic close the door behind them, the gentle click echoing louder than it should have, sealing them into a stillness that made her pulse thrum in her ears. She lowered her gaze, hoping the movement hid the flicker of fear that crossed her face. She had never been alone with him in a room before, and certainly not in a place where he could see her so clearly, without the protection of distance or distraction. Dominic stepped forward with measured steps that gave the impression of both caution and certainty. He stopped at the counter, selecting a pair of clean gloves with a deliberate calm, as though he were focusing entirely on the task rather than the person watching him. For a man who commanded empires with a word, his movements were surprisingly careful. When he turned back toward her, Mariah felt the urge to shrink further, but forced herself to remain still. The silence stretched. She clenched her injured arms subtly against her ribs, trying to brace for the pain she knew was coming. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I need to look at your injury, Mariah." She nodded quickly, her fingers trembling as she began to lift her sleeve. The fabric pulled slightly against the dried blood beneath, making her flinch. Dominic stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and clean, like cedar and warm leather. "Let me help," he said quietly. She stilled. He reached forward, careful not to touch her skin, and gently lifted the fabric with the patience of someone unwrapping something fragile. As the sleeve rolled upward, the bruise revealed itself in slow, painful detail. A deep, spreading discoloration covered her side, dark at the center and fading in uneven rings, a clear sign of impact against a hard surface. Beneath the bruising, a thin cut traced along her rib, where the wooden stair had split the skin. Dominic inhaled slowly as he took in the full extent of the injury. His expression did not show shock, but something far more dangerous. Unspoken fury. Not at her. At the thought of her bearing this alone. How long have you been working like this? She forced her voice steady. Since this morning. I slipped at sunrise. I did not think it was this bad at first. I figured I could handle it. His jaw tightened. And you wrapped it yourself. She nodded. I used a strip of cotton cloth. It was the only thing I could grab quickly. Dominic placed the sleeve back against her arm, covering the bruise for a moment as if shielding it from the world. Then he stepped back to reach for disinfectant and clean bandages. He moved with a quiet intensity that made Mariah feel small in a way she had never expected. Not insignificant. Protected. When he returned, he spoke again, his voice carrying a tone she had never heard from him, a tone that softened the edges of his normally unshakable demeanor. You should not endure pain in silence. Ever. She looked away, her cheeks warming. I did not want anyone to be upset with me. I cannot afford to be a problem. You are not a problem, he said sharply, then softened. Someone should have noticed. Someone should have helped you. His words made her throat tighten. She blinked rapidly, fighting the sting of tears. She was not used to kindness. Not this kind. Dominic cleaned the cut with slow, careful movements, as though every touch was measured to avoid even the slightest extra discomfort. She could not remember the last time anyone had treated her pain with such care. As he wrapped the bandage around her ribs, securing it firmly but not harshly, he lowered his voice. Pain is not something you hide. Not from me. Not in my home. She swallowed hard. The word home echoed in her mind, foreign and heavy. He finished adjusting the bandage, then stepped back, studying her with an expression she could not decipher. You should have told someone the moment it happened. The staff are here to help you as much as they help me. She shook her head softly. That is not how it feels, sir. People like me do not get to slow down. Dominic held her gaze for a long, quiet moment, and something in his eyes shifted as if he were seeing a truth he had not known to look for before. Then he spoke again, with a calm that held the weight of an unspoken promise. You will never be punished for being human, Mariah. Not while you work under my roof. She felt the words settle into the deepest parts of her, breaking something open she had kept locked away for years. A small, shaky breath escaped her, and she lowered her gaze, unable to speak. For the first time since sunrise, the pain in her ribs eased. Not because of the bandage, but because she finally felt like she was no longer carrying it alone. Dominic removed the gloves slowly, disposing of them with a quiet precision that echoed in the still air of the medical room. Mariah sat silently on the examination table, holding the edge of the mattress with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. The fresh bandage hugged her ribs with a snug pressure, easing the sharp pain but not the heaviness inside her chest. She had been looked at before by supervisors, by strangers, by people who only saw her uniform. But this was the first time she felt seen. Truly seen. Dominic stepped back just enough to give her space, yet the room still felt smaller with him in it. His presence had a gravity of its own, commanding without raising a voice, demanding attention without issuing a single order. Mariah kept her eyes down, aware of every breath she took. The bandage restricted her movement slightly, making her breath shorter but less painful. He noticed that too. He always noticed. I wrapped it tightly enough to support the injury, he said quietly, watching her posture. But not so tightly that it will restrict too much airflow. Tell me if it becomes uncomfortable. She nodded, her voice too fragile to trust. Dominic stood near the counter, his hand resting lightly on the edge as if he were grounding himself as well. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but it was charged with an unspoken shift. Something had changed the moment he saw her pain, something he was not used to confronting. After a long moment, he spoke again, his tone calm but edged with something thoughtful. This house runs on routine. People know their roles. People know their jobs. But many forget that the people behind those jobs have limits. His gaze drifted back to her. You were never meant to carry your pain alone. She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening against the fabric of her apron. No one has ever said that to me before, she whispered. Not in any job I have had. He studied her for a moment, the weight of her words settling into the room like a soft echo. That should not be your reality, Mariah. Not here. Not anywhere. She swallowed. Gently, unsure how to respond. Dominic stepped forward, his steps deliberate but slow enough not to startle her. He stopped a few feet away from the examination table. "I want to understand something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly." She lifted her eyes hesitantly. "Yes, sir. When you slipped this morning, why did you not call for help? Why did you not ask anyone from the staff to assist you?" She lowered her gaze again, her voice barely above a breath. "Because I thought they would say I was slowing down the work. Because everyone is always so busy. Because I did not want anyone to think I was weak." Dominic watched her as she spoke, absorbing every word. "And because you feared losing your job," he added quietly. Her silence confirmed it. He exhaled through his nose, a slow, contained sound that carried more emotion than raised voices ever could. "That fear should never exist in my home. Not for you. Not for anyone." Mariah felt her throat tighten again, and she blinked quickly to clear the rising wetness in her eyes. She hated how easily emotions came when she was tired. She hated how emotion made her feel exposed. Dominic seemed to sense the shift. He reached for a small stool tucked against the wall and pulled it next to the examination table. He sat down, not towering over her, but leveling his gaze with hers. It was the first time she had seen him sit in the presence of a staff member. It unsettled her in a way she could not explain. "Look at me, Mariah," he said softly. "Not an order. A request." She lifted her gaze slowly. His eyes were dark, steady, and impossibly calm, the kind of calm that quieted even the loudest room. "You are not replaceable," he said. "You need to let go of that fear." She inhaled shakily. "I have never been important enough for anyone to say that," she whispered. Dominic held her gaze a moment longer, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his expression. Something like recognition. Something like understanding. He rose from the stool, his movements as graceful and controlled as ever. "You matter here, Mariah. I need you to understand that." She looked down again, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. No one had ever spoken to her with such certainty. No one had ever tried to lift the burden she carried alone. Dominic moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. "From this moment forward, you will not hide your pain. Not from me. Never from me." His voice held no threat, only truth. And truth was heavier than anything she had braced herself for. Mariah sat perfectly still on the examination table, the bandage warm against her skin, as the meaning of his words settled into the deepest parts of her. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, she felt something unfamiliar bloom quietly inside her chest. Safety. Mariah sat perfectly still on the examination table, her breathing shallow as Dominic stood near the door, his presence filling the medical room with a quiet gravity. The bandage around her ribs held her injury firmly, offering a comfort she did not expect, yet her heart pounded with a different kind of ache. The moment felt unreal, like something fragile suspended in time. She wanted to believe she could breathe normally again, but fear and gratitude tangled in her chest, making each breath uncertain. Dominic opened the door slightly, glancing into the hallway as if checking that no interruption would reach them. Then he closed it again with deliberate care, the soft click echoing through the room. He turned back toward her with a calm expression, but there was a tension beneath it, a shadow of thought she could not quite decipher. She watched him, unsure what came next. She felt safe for the first time in a long while. Yet with that safety came a new fear. A fear of being seen too clearly. Dominic walked toward her again, slower this time, as though he sensed her hesitating emotions. He stopped a few steps from the examination table, his eyes steady and unreadable. "You need to rest for a few minutes," he said quietly. "Do not move too quickly. The injury will hurt more if you strain it." She nodded softly. "Yes, sir." Dominic held her gaze for a moment. His expression remained calm, but she noticed the slight narrowing of his eyes, a sign that something deeper stirred beneath the surface. He seemed to be studying her, not with judgment, but with a kind of consideration she had never been offered before. Mariah shifted slightly on the table, trying not to wince as the bandage pressed deeper into the bruised skin. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "Sir, I will go back to work soon," she began. "The others will need help preparing for the evening event." He cut her off gently, but with authority. "No, you will not return to work until I say you can." Her eyes widened. "But sir, the staff will notice. They will wonder where I am. And the head of staff will be upset if I vanish in the middle of the afternoon." Dominic took another step toward her. "Let them wonder. Your health comes first." She shook her head quickly. That has never been true anywhere I have worked. I have always had to push through pain. That is how life works for people like me. His jaw tightened at her words, a clear sign that they did not sit well with him. He took another slow step forward, lowering his voice. That is how your life has been. But that is not how it will be here. She swallowed hard, her eyes dropping to the floor. The kindness in his voice unsettled her more than anger ever could have. It made her feel vulnerable in ways she did not know how to process. Dominic watched her closely. You are too used to suffering in silence, Mariah. You carry yourself like someone who expects punishment for needing help. Her breath caught. The words struck with precision, cutting through the layers she had built around herself for years. A soft tremor moved through her hands. She quickly hid them beneath the edge of the table, hoping he did not notice. He did. He always noticed. Dominic pulled the small stool closer again and sat down across from her, lowering himself into her field of view. He did not force her to look at him. He simply existed there, waiting, quiet and calm. Mariah, he said gently, there is no punishment waiting for you here. Not for being hurt. Not for needing rest. Not for being human. She blinked rapidly as heat pricked behind her eyes. She could not allow herself to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. Her voice came out soft and shaken. I have spent so many years being told to work harder, to ignore pain, to prove myself in silence. Dominic leaned forward slightly, elbows resting. On his knees. That stops now. She inhaled shakily, her lips pressing together to contain emotion. Dominic stood again, his tall frame casting a long, calm shadow across the room. Then his voice lowered, turning deep and steady. You will not endure pain alone. Not under my roof. Not under my watch. The words struck something inside her that had been locked away for too many years. And without warning, without meaning to, Mariah felt the first tear slip down her cheek. She turned her face away quickly, ashamed of the overflowing emotion. Dominic stepped closer, his voice softening even more. It is all right, Mariah. You do not have to hide anymore. And that was the moment she reached the edge of her emotional limit. The moment her carefully held composure shattered. She bowed her head, shoulders trembling as silent tears fell onto her lap. Dominic did not move to touch her. He simply stood near her, steady as a pillar, letting her cry without judgment. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to break, because someone finally cared enough to notice she was hurting. Mariah wiped her tears quickly with the back of her hand, but the emotion still trembled across her face, soft and raw. Dominic did not move, allowing her the space to breathe. The room filled only with the quiet hum of the overhead lights and the steady rhythm of her uneven breaths. She tried to apologize, the instinct drilled into her from years of being told to stay composed, but the words failed. She could not force her voice into its usual shape. Dominic waited a moment longer before speaking, his tone low, steady, and careful. Mariah, look at me. She hesitated, but eventually she lifted her gaze, her eyes red and shining. He did not look irritated or impatient. He looked patient, almost gentle, a sharp contrast to the hardened reputation that kept everyone else in the mansion at a distance. You do not need to be ashamed of emotions, he said quietly. They do not make you weak. They make you human. She inhaled shakily, the words hitting her deeper than she expected. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table tighter. Sir, I am sorry, she managed. I did not mean to fall apart like that. He shook his head slowly. You are not falling apart. You are releasing pain you have carried for too long. That is nothing to apologize for. She blinked again, the sting of more tears rising. She forced them back. She had spent so many years trying to be strong, trying to hold her world together with trembling hands. The sudden shift in how he spoke to her made every emotion rise to the surface at once, and she did not know how to quiet them. Dominic stepped to the small sink and washed his hands again, giving her a moment to steady herself. Then he reached for a fresh glass from the cabinet and filled it with water. He offered it to her with an open hand. Drink this. Your body has been under stress. She accepted the glass with a small nod. The cool water soothed her dry throat as she took slow sips. Once she finished, Dominic spoke again. Mariah, I need to understand something more. When you slipped this morning, did anyone see you? She shook her head. No, sir. I was outside near the back porch. Everyone else was inside preparing the main dining hall. And you came back to work immediately. She nodded. Yes, sir. I did not want to delay anything. I thought if I just kept moving, the pain would fade. Dominic exhaled with a slow firmness, an unmistakable sign of disapproval. Pain does not fade by being ignored. It grows. It becomes something heavier, something dangerous. She lowered her gaze. I did not think anyone would care, sir. That was when Dominic took a step closer, his voice dropping into a deeper, more controlled calm. I care, Mariah. The words froze her breath. She felt heat rush through her chest, not from fear, but from disbelief. No one had said those words to her in years. Not since her mother fell ill, and she became the person who held everything together. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. Dominic continued, his tone unwavering. You work hard. You show up every day. You give more of yourself than anyone sees. That deserves care. His words carried the weight of truth, not flattery. That made them more difficult to absorb. Her voice trembled. I am not used to being seen like that, sir. He nodded once. I can tell. Which is why you need to understand something important. He paused, allowing the quiet to settle before he continued. Strength does not come from silence. It comes from allowing support when you need it. You are carrying too much alone. She swallowed hard, her chest tight with emotion she had buried for so long that she barely recognized it. Dominic stepped back only enough to give her room to breathe. I will not allow you to return to your tasks until you are fully steady. And from this moment forward, you will not hide your pain. Not from me. Her lower lip trembled. Sir, why are you being so kind to me? Dominic held her gaze, and for the first time since she met him, she saw something vulnerable flicker behind his eyes. Because no one else noticed, Mariah? And they should have. She felt her heart jolt painfully, overwhelmed by the unexpected sincerity in his voice. He continued, and because I do not overlook the people who keep this house standing. You are one of them. She bowed her head, her tears silent but steady now, not from fear, but from the fragile relief of finally being acknowledged. Dominic watched her, his expression softening. You have carried your pain long enough. You do not have to carry it alone anymore. In that still room, with the faint scent of antiseptic in the air, Mariah felt something shift inside her again. A breaking, a healing, a quiet beginning she never saw coming. Mariah sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her pulse still unsteady from the weight of emotions she had let slip moments earlier. The medical room felt warmer now, not because the temperature had changed, but because the atmosphere no longer held the same tension that had wrapped itself around her when she first entered. Yet a new kind of tension lingered, quiet and heavy, shaped by everything Dominic had said to her and everything he had seen. Dominic stood near the counter, facing slightly away from her as he organized the medical supplies he had used. His movements were controlled and precise, the way someone moves when they are thinking deeply. He placed each item exactly where it belonged, not out of ritual, but as if putting things in order helped him settle whatever thoughts were running through his mind. Mariah watched him, her breathing softer now, though every inhale still carried a faint ache from the bruised rib. She kept her posture straight, afraid to intrude on his silence, but also afraid to break the fragile peace that had formed between them. After a few moments, Dominic turned back toward her. His eyes were steady but thoughtful, as if he were weighing something important. I need you to tell me something honestly, Mariah. She tensed slightly. Yes, sir. He approached her slowly, not wanting to overwhelm her after the vulnerability she had already shown. When he stopped in front of her, he lowered his voice. If I had not walked through that hallway earlier, if I had not seen you holding your side, would you have told anyone about this injury? She lowered her gaze. No, sir. I would not have. And if the pain grew worse. She paused. Her voice quieted into confession. I still would not have said anything. Dominic exhaled slowly, the sound thick with something like disappointment, not directed at her, but at the circumstances that shaped her. That is not acceptable, he said quietly. Not from this day forward. Mariah nodded, though the words tightened her chest. She was not used to rules designed to protect her. Dominic watched her for another moment, then sat on the stool again, leveling his gaze with hers. His tone shifted into something deeper. Tell me why you believed no one in this house would care. Mariah hesitated. The truth was tangled, fragile, and she feared it would sound foolish spoken aloud. But after everything he had already seen, she felt she no longer had the option of hiding. She took a small breath. Because I have worked in many homes, sir. Places where the only thing that mattered was the work being done, not the person doing it. She tightened her fingers in her lap. If you slowed down, you were let go. If you asked for help, you were seen as a burden. You learned quickly that silence kept you safe. Dominic listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable but attentive. Mariah continued, her voice unsteady. I thought it was the same everywhere. I did not want to disappoint anyone here. I did not want to give the head of staff a reason to replace me. And I especially did not want to upset you. Dominic leaned forward slightly, the intensity in his eyes deepening. You have never once disappointed me. Her breath caught. He continued, and I do not want a staff that fears me. Mariah shook her head softly. People here respect you, sir. They move carefully around you because they do not want to make mistakes. That is not respect, Mariah. That is fear. His voice carried a quiet weight, heavy enough to make her lift her gaze again. And fear cannot build a loyal home. She swallowed gently, uncertain how to respond. Dominic paused, his voice softening. I do not want you to be afraid of me. Not ever. She felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a slow and unfamiliar comfort. She had feared him since the day she first arrived, not because he had ever treated her poorly, but because of who he was. The power he held, the presence he carried. The silence that followed filled the room like a deep breath. Dominic straightened slightly, his eyes still locked with hers. I may lead this house. I may make decisions others do not understand. But I do not harm people who are loyal and honest. And you have been both since the first day you stepped through the door. Mariah felt tears prick behind her eyes again. But this time, they were not from pain. They formed from the soft shock of being valued in a way she had never known. Dominic rose from the stool, his expression firm once more, but not cold. I will make something very clear to you, he said, and to everyone else in this house. You are not invisible. You are not replaceable. And you will not be dismissed for needing care. She nodded, unable to speak as emotion tightened her throat. Dominic stepped toward the door, preparing to leave the room, but paused with his hand resting on the polished metal handle. He turned his head slightly toward her. I saw your pain today, Mariah, and it will not happen again. Not under my watch. Then he opened the door, and for the first time in her life, Mariah felt the stunning weight of a promise meant to protect her. Mariah remained seated on the examination table long after Dominic stepped into the hallway, leaving the door half open as if to invite her to breathe again. Yet even with the space he had given her, she felt the air shimmer with the weight of everything he had said. Her ribs ached beneath the bandage, but it was a different ache now, softened by care. She inhaled slowly, letting the scent of antiseptic and warm lights settle her nerves. She did not know how long she sat there, hands folded, heartbeat steadying little by little. When Dominic finally returned, his footsteps were quieter than before. He closed the door gently behind him and faced her with a calm that steadied her more than words. The dinner event will begin soon, he said, but there is one more thing we need to discuss before you leave this room. Her pulse quickened. She nodded, waiting. Dominic approached her with deliberate steps and paused a short distance away. His eyes carried that same controlled intensity, but there was something else beneath the surface, something quieter and heavier. Earlier, when you told me why you stayed silent, you spoke with fear. Fear that you would be replaced. Fear that your pain was an inconvenience. Fear that you did not matter. Mariah lowered her gaze, feeling a familiar heaviness at the center of her chest. I know it is difficult to unlearn fear, Dominic continued, but I need you to understand how this house works under my leadership. People are valued for their honesty, for their loyalty, for their work ethic. You have shown all of those. You have never once failed your duties. Her voice trembled. I try my best every day, sir. I know, he said gently, and that is exactly why your well-being matters. She felt her eyes sting again, but she blinked quickly to hold back the emotion. Dominic watched her carefully, studying her posture, the way she held her hands tightly together, the subtle tension in her shoulders. You push yourself past your limits because you believe silence protects you, he said. But silence is not protection. Not here. Not with me. She inhaled deeply, her breath unsteady. Dominic stepped closer. I want to ask you something, and I want the truth. She looked up slowly, bracing herself. When you woke this morning and felt the pain from the fall, what did you tell yourself? Her throat tightened. She looked down at the floor. I told myself that I had to keep going, that there was work to do, that I could not afford to rest. And did you believe that? Yes, sir. I believed that if I stopped, someone would be disappointed. Someone would think I was weak. Dominic shook his head slowly, a rare softness settling across his expression. You are not weak. Needing help is not weakness. Enduring your pain alone is what hurts you. She swallowed hard. I did not want anyone to think I needed special treatment. I just wanted to do my job well. He stepped closer still, his voice lowering. You do your job well, every day. Better than most. You take care of this house as if it were your own. But no job demands you sacrifice your health. No task is worth the silence that hurts you. Mariah felt her shoulders tremble as another wave of emotion rose inside her. Dominic noticed. He always noticed. He softened his tone further. Tell me something, Mariah. If another maid had been injured, someone you worked beside, someone who struggled alone, would you have helped her? She answered without hesitation. Yes, sir. Immediately. Then why do you not believe you deserve that same care? The question settled into the quiet of the room like a soft thunder, echoing through her mind, pressing against every fragile wall she had built over the years. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words formed. Dominic spoke gently. You cannot carry your world alone forever. You deserve support. You deserve rest. You deserve to be seen. Her breathing hitched, fragile and uneven. Dominic stepped to the side so he could look at her without towering over her. His voice dropped to a deep, steady whisper. You deserve care, Mariah, and you will have it. From now on. Her tears slipped silently down her face again, not from pain, not from fear, but from something she had long forgotten how to feel. Relief. Dominic watched her with a calm that felt like a shelter. When you leave this room, he said, you will not walk out as someone who must hide. You will leave as someone I intend to protect. The promise wrapped around her like a quiet shield, soothing every trembling fear she had carried since sunrise. In that moment, under the warm lights of the medical room, Mariah felt something shift inside her again. She was still hurting. She was still afraid. But for the first time, she felt the beginning of something she had never known before. Worth. Mariah sat with her back straight and her hands resting lightly on the sides of the examination table, trying to gather herself after the emotional weight of everything Dominic had told her. The medical room felt different now, warmer in a way she could not explain, as if the air itself had softened around her. Her ribs still pulsed with a dull ache beneath the firm bandage, but the fear that had once lived in her chest had eased. Not vanished, but eased. Dominic stood near the door again, his hand resting on the metal handle as if he were deciding whether to open it or give her another moment. The faint murmurs of staff preparing the evening event drifted through the hallway outside, a reminder that the house around them continued to move even as her world stood still. After a calm breath, Dominic released the handle and turned back toward her. His expression had settled into something firm and resolved, the kind of look that signaled a decision already made. Before you leave this room, he said softly, there is one more action that must be taken. Mariah tensed slightly. She nodded. Yes, sir. He approached her with slow, deliberate steps, as though careful not to overwhelm her. When he stopped in front of her, he lowered his voice. You are not going back to your duties today. She blinked in surprise. Sir, I can help with the dining hall preparations. I promise I can move slowly. I will be careful. Dominic shook his head once, his voice steady. You are injured, Mariah. You will rest. She held her breath. But the head of staff will be looking for me. They will think I walked away from my responsibilities. Dominic met her gaze with a calm that silenced every fear she tried to speak aloud. They will answer to me, not you. Her heart thudded hard in her chest. It was rare for someone like her to be defended. Rare for someone in her position to be shielded so directly. Rare, almost unimaginable, to hear a man of his authority say such a thing with quiet intent. Dominic crossed to the small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and removed a ledger used for documenting staff duties. He set it on the counter, its weight echoing lightly in the still room. Then he picked up a pen. Mariah watched him with confusion. Sir, what are you doing? He flipped the ledger open to the current day and wrote a clear note across the staff list in controlled, bold letters. When he finished, he turned the ledger toward her. Written across the line that listed her name was a short directive, each word deliberate and unmistakable. Mariah is placed under medical rest by order of Dominic Romano. She inhaled sharply. Sir, I do not know what to say. You do not need to say anything, he replied. This is not a request. It is a decision. Her throat tightened, full of a kind of disbelief that made her feel unsteady in her own skin. No one had ever formally protected her. No one had ever put their name beside hers, marking a boundary that no one else could cross. Dominic closed the ledger, his hand resting on it for a moment before he put it back in the drawer. When he turned to face her again, something in his expression had shifted. Not softer, clearer, stronger. From this moment forward, he said, resting his hands lightly in his pockets, no one in this house will question your rest when it is needed. No one will pressure you to push through pain. And no one will make you feel small for being human. A single tear slipped down Mariah's cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, but Dominic had already seen it. His voice gentled. You have earned respect through your dedication, Mariah. Now allow yourself to receive the care that comes with it. She looked down at the bandage wrapped around her ribs, the reminder of the fall she had tried so hard to hide. It amazed her how something so simple, something so painful, had led to all of this. Dominic stepped closer, his tone lowering with quiet intent. And one more thing. Her eyes lifted to his. If you ever find yourself hurt again, even a small injury, you will come to me. Immediately. Not later. Not when the pain grows worse. Immediately. She hesitated, startled by the weight behind his words. But why me, sir? Why do you insist on this? Dominic held her gaze, the answer in his eyes before it reached his voice. Because you matter in this house. And because I refuse to watch you suffer in silence again. The words settled over her like a quiet, protective shield, stronger than any promise she had ever been given. And for the first time in her life, Mariah truly believed she was no longer alone. Mariah felt herself sitting taller without meaning to, as if the words Dominic had spoken were gently lifting the weight she had carried for so long. The medical room felt softer now, still bright, still sterile, yet changed in the way a room changes when someone finally speaks the truth that was needed. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, no longer clenched, and her eyes followed Dominic as he stepped back toward the door with the same careful authority he carried in every movement. He opened the door only a few inches, letting a sliver of warm hallway light spill into the room, but he did not step out. Instead, he turned back toward her again, as though something unfinished remained between them. The evening event begins soon, he said quietly, but you are not to attend to it. You will go straight to your room and rest. She nodded, though a faint uncertainty still lingered in her expression. Yes, sir. Dominic paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in disapproval, but in recognition of the lingering fear she tried to hide. You are still anxious, he said gently. I can see it. She lowered her gaze. I just do not want anyone thinking I abandoned my duties. That worry is no longer yours to carry, he replied. It is mine. The firmness of his voice eased some of the tension inside her chest. She inhaled slowly, testing how much the bandage restricted her breath. The pain pulsed softly, but it no longer dominated her senses. Dominic stepped fully back into the room and closed the door once more, as if realizing she still needed a moment before facing the outside world again. Mariah, he said, his voice quieter now. What you did today was not weakness. It was endurance. It was responsibility. You showed up despite your pain because that is who you are. You do not fail others. But you must understand that others cannot fail you either. She lifted her eyes to him slowly. I am still afraid, she whispered. I do not know how to let myself rest. He nodded once, not dismissing her fear, but acknowledging it. Rest is not surrender. It is protection. It is what you deserve. Something loosened inside her, as though the threads of old beliefs were slowly unraveling. Dominic walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she could hear the subtle steadiness of his breathing. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted into something deep and resonant, something she could feel settle into her bones. You have been carrying your world alone for far too long, but you do not have to carry anything alone here. Not your duties, not your pain, not your fears. You are part of this home now. Whether you remember that every day or not, it remains true. Mariah felt a warmth rise in her chest, unexpected and overwhelming. She found herself placing a hand lightly against the bandage over her ribs, not because it hurt, but because she needed the grounding. Dominic continued, his voice steady. When you walk out of this room, you will go directly to your quarters. You will rest. And if anyone questions your absence, they will answer to me. A soft breath escaped her lips, fragile but relieved. Thank you. Sir, she whispered. His expression softened slightly, a rare glimpse into something unguarded. You do not have to thank me for caring. It is something you should have always received. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words wash over her. When she opened them again, Dominic had stepped toward the door once more, but this time he did not open it. Instead, he turned back with a quiet intensity that made her heartbeat pause. One more thing, he said. She waited, her breath held. The next time something hurts you, whether it is a bruise or a burden, you come to me. Immediately. You will not hide what you feel. Not from me. The sincerity in his voice wrapped around her like a promise, heavy and warm and undeniable. She nodded slowly, a tear slipping free despite her effort to hold it back. I will try, she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into a softer tone that felt like a shelter. You will not try, Mariah. You will do it. Because you are worth the care you are being given. Her heart tightened in a way that felt both painful and healing. In that small, bright room, surrounded by quiet and truth, Mariah felt something deep inside her begin to mend. And for the first time, she believed she was worthy of being cared for. Mariah rose slowly from the examination table, one hand pressed lightly against the bandage beneath her uniform, the other bracing her as she steadied her breath. The medical room felt quieter now, as if even the walls were holding the weight of everything that had been said between them. Dominic stood near the door, watching her with an attentiveness that made her chest tighten in a way she could not fully name. His presence did not crowd her. It steadied her. When she reached the center of the room, he stepped aside and opened the door for her, the simple gesture carrying a respect she had not expected from a man of his stature. She paused, uncertain, her fingers curling gently at her side. Sir, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Thank you for everything you have done today. He did not look away. His tone remained low and certain. You do not have to thank me for doing what is right. But her gratitude remained, warm and fragile in her chest. She gave a small nod and stepped into the hallway. The warm glow of the mansion lights washed over her, softer than before, as if the house itself had shifted. A few staff members hurried past, carrying trays and linens for the evening event. They barely glanced in her direction, but for once, she did not shrink. She felt different. She felt held up by something stronger than fear. Dominic stepped into the hallway behind her, his presence quiet but commanding. He did not announce anything. He did not raise his voice. Yet the moment he appeared, every staff member in sight straightened subtly, as if recognizing an invisible shift in the air. Dominic looked at her once more before speaking, his voice soft enough for only her to hear. Go to your quarters. Rest. If you need anything, you come find me. Do you understand? She nodded, her breath catching slightly. Yes, sir. He held her gaze another moment, the corners of his expression softening with something unspoken, something like a promise layered beneath his authority. Then he turned and walked toward the main foyer, his steps steady, his shoulders squared as he prepared to greet the evening's guests. Mariah watched him go, feeling a surprising ache in her chest at the sight of him disappearing. Around the corner. Not fear. Not doubt. Something warmer. Something she had not felt in a long time. She made her way slowly down the corridor, careful not to strain her injured side. Each step reminded her of the pain still lingering beneath the bandage, but it also reminded her of the hands that had wrapped it, gentle and patient. When she reached her small room on the second floor, she closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, exhaling a long, trembling breath. The quiet of her room felt different now, less lonely, less heavy. She sank onto the edge of her bed, letting her body ease into the mattress. The pain pulsed faintly, but it no longer frightened her. She knew she would heal. She knew she would not have to hide again. Not after today. She allowed her eyes to drift closed, the memory of his voice echoing softly through her mind. You matter in this house. You are worth the care you are being given. She rested her hand gently against her ribs, feeling not just the ache of the bruise, but the weight of something new. Worth. A soft knock startled her, and she opened her eyes. Before she could rise, the door cracked open just enough for her to see one of the younger maids standing timidly in the hallway. I was asked to bring you dinner, the girl said quietly. Mr. Romano told us you are to rest for the remainder of the night. Mariah blinked, her heart fluttering faintly. She nodded and accepted the tray with a grateful smile. Thank you. The girl returned the smile, small but warm, then hurried down the hall. Mariah set the tray on her bedside table and sat for a long moment, letting the reality settle in her chest. Dominic had not just cared for her injury. He had shifted the way the entire house treated her. And he had done so without spectacle, without lecturing, without demanding gratitude. He had done it simply because he believed she deserved dignity. She lay back gently, closing her eyes once more. The pain in her ribs had not disappeared, but it felt different now, softened by the truth she could no longer deny. She was seen. She was protected. She was valued. And in that quiet room, as the mansion lights glowed softly through the curtains, Mariah whispered the words she had never allowed herself to speak aloud. I am worth care. Outside her door, the hallway fell silent, carrying only the distant hum of evening preparations. And in that stillness, the world remembered what dignity looks like.